Welcome back to Managing Your Mental Health During COVID-19. And I'm really excited to bring this episode to you. When I was thinking about putting this show together and thinking about the things that people might be struggling with, one of the things that came to my mind was the thought that everyone's working from home, probably with your spouse or your partner working from home, and you've got now children at home and you're trying to work and homeschool the kids and keep them occupied and all of the things that we have to do. And I thought people probably need some help with that. And after I was thinking about this, I happened to be on a call with my friend Caspar Craven, who himself is an international speaker. He's an expert in developing and managing high performing teams. So that's generally what he speaks about. But he's got a unique set of skills as well, in that he actually took his wife, 3 children under the age of 10, so I think they were 9, 7, and 2, took them on a sailboat sailing around the world. So talk about social isolation. The poor guy couldn't even get off the boat to go and walk around the block. I mean, it was really isolation. So I'm so happy to welcome him to the show. So Caspar, I'll bet you never thought those skills that you developed during that trip would be in such high demand at some point in the future.
Who knew, eh? Who knew? Hi, Stu. It's great to be here, and yeah, exactly that, right? I mean, it's it's clearly, I mean, we've been thrown into this situation right now, and we're all having to adapt to life as we are. But I seem to have a reasonable amount of experience. I've had 3 years of my life now having gone into chosen self-isolation. Once on a round the world yacht race, and second time with my wife and kids. So I have a little bit of experience in how do you deal in close quarters, managing work and life and kids and homeschooling and relationships and all those sorts of things. So,
right, which is what I want to talk about. But I can't help but think that everybody who's watching this will have the question, what was it that led you to the decision to take 3 kids? And I was right, wasn't I? 9, 7, and 2.
Correct.
When you took them on the sailboat, what was it that led up to that decision? Because that's a massive undertaking. I mean, you'd already been sailing around the world, so you had to know what you were getting yourself into. So what was it that led up to that, and how did you prepare?
Yeah, no, good question. So I'll take you back to 2009. Back then, I was running a small business. It was a data analytics company. We were turning over about $500,000. The business was failing. We were losing money. And my wife and I weren't seeing eye to eye, that's putting it politely, working 16 to 18-hour days. So our family life was pretty much ragged. And my wife and I weren't that far away from getting divorced. And we sat down and said, look, the current place where we are is not great. So let's write a more exciting story of the future. So there were three parts to that. One was turning relationship and family life around. Second thing was building a successful, thriving business. And once we'd done that, we said, let's go off and spend some time with our kids and go and sail the world with them. So it was a 5-year plan. So we had, 5 years thinking about this, planning for this, preparing for this, thinking of every single risk you could imagine and saying, how do we overcome that? So basically, it was, born out of a tough situation and basically just rewriting our story of the future.
Okay, so interesting. So you take 5 of you on the boat, and how did that go? Was there an adjustment period at the beginning?
It really was. So look, I think, even though we had 5 years preparing for this and we knew this was going to happen, suddenly being in that environment with everyone was like, it took quite a bit of adjusting, because I went from working 15, 16 hours in my business to suddenly being 24/7 with my wife and our kids. And I should add, by the way, I was also running 3 businesses at the same time. So I was working on the boat, we were sailing the boat, keeping us safe, navigating, plus juggling relationship, plus homeschooling. And I think for the first 3 months, we were talking about this before, I was kind of like holding my breath and just like, okay, I'm going to adjust to this. But it was just like, I was trying to control everything rather than accepting we had a new normal. And look, that was my choice to do that, which is fundamentally different to where we are now. And I get that. But where we are now is we've had this situation forced upon us. And I think that there's this thing about like, okay, this is the new reality. Let's just breathe into this. There are things beyond our control here, such as having to work in the same space as other people, our partners, our kids, and so on. How do we adapt to that? So I think for me, it forced a more flexible mindset. That was the breakthrough moment that I had after 3 months, saying, okay, let's really understand what's driving each and every person in the team. How do we now work together in a more effective way?
Okay, so basically after 3 months, you stopped holding your breath and you exhaled into the situation. Is that right?
Pretty much.
Okay.
And it was just accepting that I couldn't control everything and I had to do things in a different way. I had to let go of fixed rules that were in my head. So, for example, homeschooling. Beforehand, we've been trying to follow the English curriculum. And we just got to a place where we're just exhausted because we're trying to follow all these different lesson plans every day. And it was just impossible. And all that was happening, we were just getting angry and just sort of, it wasn't working. So we just flipped it on its head and said, look, the core outcome here is that our kids get educated. What are they most interested in? What are they most curious about? And really just started like accepting the situation we were in and saying, okay, what's a really practical way to deal with our homeschooling, for example? And so the answer to the homeschooling was find the things that kids were interested in and go super deep into each of those different areas rather than trying to force on them 10 different subjects which they weren't interested in. So we got through the education with just taking a totally different approach to it, just by just accepting the reality that we had. 2 years after we came back, they went back into normal school. They didn't suffer at all. So it was just having that flexibility and accepting the reality of the new situation.
Okay, so couple things. So I really like what you're saying about the exhale thing, and I think that'll stick with me because as you were talking about that, I realized I'm doing the same thing. I'm kind of holding my breath, waiting for the news, right, of when the economy is going to open up again. Which is interesting because what I also know is when faced with any problem, there's really only 3 choices. You change it, you accept it, or you get rid of it. And we can't get rid of this. We can't change it. So, the only choice is to
Exactly that.
into it. Okay, so I love that. And as you were talking, and I listen, I completely agree. Raising 2 kids of my own, I was always on guard. I was always watching for what piques their interest, right? Where are their natural talents and skills, and then guiding them towards developing those further, because learning's easier when you're excited about it and when you want to do it. But that was actually going to be my question. So that makes sense to me that, the things the kids are interested in, you go deeper into that. They're learning valuable life skills and all kinds of things. But my question was going to be, how did they fare when they went back into a regular school system in things like maths and English and science, the core curriculum that it's actually really hard to get them to pay attention to? Did they suffer?
So the short answer is no. Look, someone said to me when we were away that never let the schooling get in the way of your kids' education, right? And the most important thing that we did with them is helping them to learn how to learn. And it was by finding the things they were curious and interested in, they would then go and do their own learning because they were interested. So they got used to the whole thing of doing some research, getting stuck, asking for help, going deeper into it. And for me, that's what the education system should really all be about. And if you have that mindset, then you can learn anything. So we come back after 2 years and kids settle back into school with, my oldest daughter, she had like a few ups and downs for the first 6 months or so, but now they're all just like absolutely flying along because they've got that fundamental thing. They've learned how to learn, and also having developed other life skills of resilience. What do you do when things go wrong? Because we had situations where things went wrong. So they learned how to learn, and they had resilience built in as well. So
they must have learned how to manage through crises, because I know you had some things that went terribly wrong during the trip.
We did. We had a few challenges, and the thing was, when things went wrong on the boat, it's a tiny space, and I'll just paint a picture, right? So the main living space on the boat is smaller than your average kitchen. So, it's tiny. Literally, you see people 24 hours a day. There's no space where you don't see people because you're just literally all there together. So when things went wrong, and we had a few challenging situations, the kids could see how we reacted with it and what did we do. So, and they were going through the emotions with us. And so we had the first challenge, which was in the South Pacific, where we had power failure in the middle of the ocean, and we had to figure out how to deal with that. We had a subsequent challenge in the Indian Ocean, where we had a medical emergency at the same time as a boat problem. And the kids were like, oh, well, it's just like before. This is what we do. So already they developed a blueprint for just sort of, how do you deal with things? Which, it's like, okay, let's breathe. Let's get our emotions under control, because when everything goes wrong, our emotions spike off the charts and we make rubbish decisions. So let's get under control. Let's do a thorough decision-making process. How are we going to look at all the different options? How do we make best choices in this? How do we work together? There's no point blaming anyone. There's no point getting angry. Let's look at this. So the kids saw how we dealt with those things in those situations, which, that's a life skill, right? I mean,
It is, and I think it's a really important one. I always say children learn what they live, and then they live what they learn. So in fact, we are modeling for them. How do we handle crises? How do we handle communication? What happens when a problem arises? So we're modeling all that for them. So here's a question for you then. Closed, really confined space. 5 people in a really confined space. And I think that's what people are dealing with right now. It may not be as confined, but they're dealing with everyone together 24 hours a day, which is not a normal state of affairs. And as you said, this brings challenges and stress in and of itself, and emotions get heightened, tempers flare. So how did you manage being in that confined space? And I don't know, I would, you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but I would think sailing around the world with a bunch of guys who are not family members, it might be easier to deal with conflict than it is sailing around the world with people that you love, that you're going, because those guys you sailed around the world with, you could say, hey, bye at the end of the trip, never see you again. You can't do that with your family. So tempers, I would imagine, flare, and in a small space, you didn't even have anywhere that, like, what did you do? Jump off the boat and go for a swim? Like,
so it's interesting,
right?
So the language is cabin fever, right?
Yeah.
So how do you deal with that? So the first one was actually quite defining for me, because there were 18 people on this boat who'd all paid, they had to raise $35,000 in order to go and do this race, and they'd given up a year of their lives to go and do it. You only do that if you're a strong personality. Right. So just imagine 18 strong personalities, everybody with an opinion, there's no shrinking violets, and after, 30 days at sea, deep in the Southern Ocean between Australia and South Africa, you see 2 grown men in their 40s having a stand-up fist fight over who's got the best bar of chocolate. You realize the skills that you need are nothing to do with sailing. They're all people skills. And how do you understand other people? How do you get empathetic to what's going on? So where I really learned those skills was back on that race. And we had a saying back then, was that if you have an issue, you deal with it and you leave it on the wave behind. That was the same philosophy that we adopted on the boat with the kids. And actually, it was actually easier with the family team. And maybe that's because I developed those skills the first time around. So I was more used to dealing with that. But the whole thing about dealing with it and leaving it on the wave behind, something blows up, because it always does. One of the kids has a tantrum, or Nicola and I have an argument, and it's interesting. We can talk about that in a minute, about the difference with roles on the boat, which is it's a really important thing for how we are at the moment. And the answer would be, let the emotions come down, and then let one person speak and just say what's going on for them, and then just stop. Just let the emotions come down. It's just, the easiest way I think to understand it is, like, all of us, we're just a set of chemistry. We're just a set of chemicals, and we react and we spike in certain different ways. So once you understand that and think of ourselves like a chemistry set, then it becomes easier to deal with. So one of us would speak and share stuff, what was going on, pause, and then the other one would do the same thing. And it's just trying to get that empathetic understanding what's going on for the other person. You get to a place, okay, let's leave that there. Let's let that go. We'll leave it on the wave behind and we'll move on. Because arguments, if you go to sleep on them, they only get worse. They don't get better. It's like holes in boats. They don't get any better if you leave them alone. So you have to lance that boil immediately. That's been my experience. And that worked first time, worked the second time as well. So.
That's interesting. And so as you were talking, I was thinking, if we do this right in social isolation with our own families and we learn to communicate and manage those conflicts, these are actually great transferable skills that we can take back into the workplace with us because I know we will get back to the workplace, but we can take those with us. So that's actually brilliant.
So just on that, I mean, so it's funny. So I've been taking this opportunity to write my next book, and there are 20 sets of tools in there. And a work team and a home team, it's exactly the same set of tools we need to build thriving teams in both places. So you can use them in either place. So
yeah, no, I agree with you. What I always talk about leadership and management, I always say it's no different than raising a family. Leading a team is no different than raising a family. You want the same thing for your team that you want for your kids. So you talked about roles on the boat. Roles.
Yes.
So I can see this being a very interesting concept. Can you explain a bit more?
Okay, so on the boat, Nicola and I, my wife, we had two different roles. We had the husband and wife role, and we had the captain and the first mate role. Two different things, right? And it's the same when we're at home. You have your sort of, husband-wife role, and then you both have your work roles. And because it's all been merged together now, there's like, well, what's the conversation? Where's the separation around this? And nobody that I know, unprompted, is having that conversation to say, how do we work together in the same place? But it's a fundamentally important conversation that we need to have. Here's how we found this. We were in the middle of a storm, and we needed to get a sail changed. And I turned around to Nicola, it's like, Nicola, you need to do this now. And I spoke firmly and directly. And she turned around and said, don't speak to me like that, I'm going downstairs. And it's like, no. We're in the middle of a storm. You cannot do that. And I was speaking in the captain first mate role. She was hearing it in the husband wife role. That prompted us to have the conversation. When are we in each of these different roles? Let's get really clear. And when we're in husband-wife role, I will not bring captain voice to it and vice versa, right? So it's having that clarity of conversation. It's the same thing that we're doing now at home. When am I working? When is Nicola working? And we've taken the same language. I'm on watch predominantly she's on watch in the mornings doing the homeschooling of the kids. In the afternoon, she's off watch and I do the homeschooling and play with the kids and so on. So we have that separation. She's got to work, I've got to work. So let's just have that open conversation. It's simple things as well. Who's doing the meals? Who's doing the cooking? Who's doing the cleaning? All those things, right? But it's just having that conversation because everything's been merged together. So I think it's a really important thing, simple thing, but everyone would benefit from doing that.
And what about the kids? Did they have roles when they were on the ship, on the boat?
Absolutely. So roles back then and roles now. So back then we got them involved in all the different areas. So we made each of the areas on the boat fun. So we had the rigging rock stars. So the rigging was the parts around the boat. So the rigging rock stars, that was Nicola and my son Columbus. And so he was part of that team. And then we had another team around the navigation where Willow, my daughter, was involved in that. So we divided up all the roles in the boat and made sure the kids felt they had a role. Because if people don't feel involved, don't feel they have a role, they will very quickly become terrorists. I remember when I was training for the first yacht race, we had a 10-day training sail, 18 people on the boat. 5 people were pretty good sailors. So we went out for the 10-day sail. We came back, and these 5 people were racing around everywhere on the boat doing everything. 13 people were sitting there, their arms folded, feeling like they had nothing to do. And it's just like they felt pretty down and pretty useless, and they weren't contributing to the team. So they're really ingrained in me. It's like everybody's got to feel they're contributing to what's going on. So we're at home now, and what's happening right now? We've made roles for each of the kids. So my daughter Bluebell, she's running fitness classes for us, and so she's doing that outside. Columbus is doing lots of cooking, and the funniest one of the lot, Willow, my 8-year-old, she has become our social secretary. So she's hijacked Nicola's phone. And she's like messaging all of our friends. And if they're not replying to her within like a few minutes, she's sending them poo emojis. And I promise you, if you suddenly get a poo emoji from a friend of yours, you pick up the phone pretty quickly. Says, what's going on there? But it's funny, but it's also meaning that everyone's got a role and everyone's feeling involved. And that's so important to keeping that harmonious team thing going. So yeah, simple ideas, but just making sure everybody feels part of the team.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. Poo emoji. So I can imagine. So I can imagine then now that, like when you were sailing, the kids actually feel important, valued, like they're contributing to the family and the operation of the family.
Absolutely, absolutely. Anyway, I'm doing fun. It's building in lots of fun stuff. So yesterday I said, right, I want to have some ideas for everyone about a team activity that we can do. So everyone came up with an idea, and then everyone voted on it. It was Columbus's idea. He was going to do the Craven family cook-off. So every day someone's got to cook a different meal. And so last night it was Willow. She cooked pizza. I'm up tonight, so I'm not quite sure what I'm doing yet, but I've got to figure it out pretty soon. But it's just like putting that fun in there, and we're having the scoring system. So it's just building playfulness into that as well. So because, you know, it'd be really easy to take everything too seriously at the moment. And you've got to find the fun in this, especially with kids around, right? So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree with you. So as you're talking, I'm imagining, and I think it's great what you're doing. And of course, I know you, so I know that this, you know, is easy for you. And this is kind of part of the way you look at life is through this team lens and building these strong teams. But I'm thinking about other families who this might be a novel concept for them. You know, they're maybe used to being in that role of mother, father, children, and now they're all thrown together as a team. What tips do you have for people to be able to, I want to say take it down a notch, even though those are not the right words, but to relax into this, to allow themselves to have some fun with this, to not force their kids to be the perfect model of children and, you know, going to school and allowing, because I got to imagine that when you're giving your kids these roles and saying that, you know, Bluebell is social secretary and she's sending your friends poo emojis, I mean, I can imagine there's some people who would fly off the handle at that. And so how do you back off and really relax into this and not take it yourself, the situation or the circumstances so seriously?
Yeah, so it's a really perceptive question. There are several things for me around that. The first thing is the frame of reference. And, you know, for me, I have in my mind, this is a marathon, not a sprint. And it goes back to that whole thing about holding our breath. It's like, you know, I personally think we're going to be in this for quite a while. This is the new normal. And, you know, like I did for the first 3 months on the boat, holding my breath and like trying to fight my way through it, you can't do it, right? And you can't fight reality. Reality wins every single time. This is the new reality, and we need to adapt to it in where we are. And for me, that means we need to let go of some of the fixed rules that we have in our head about how things are meant to be. You know, as human beings, we crave certainty. We see this with, you know, kids and so on. They like to know what's happening when. And as adults, we're no different. We like to have that certainty. And the rules have been ripped up and chucked out the window right now. So we've got to create a new set of rules for how things are. So I think the first step is just accepting that we need a new rule book. And then with that, it's just the flexibility to say, okay, let's write the rule book together. And I know this will be a scary thing for some people, but it's sitting down and saying, okay, if we had a blank sheet of paper, what's the story of how we're going to be now as a work team and as a home team? What's the direction that we're going in now? What's really important to us? That conversation, I say, we had that before, but we had it with the luxury of time. It's now being forced upon people to say this is the new normal. So I would say, let go of those fixed rules, no matter how hard it is, because reality is forcing the change, and have that conversation with people at home. What's really important to you? What's really important to you? And to really listen and hear that, and to come up with, you know, how we're going to manage things together. One of my biggest mistakes in my career and life has been trying to do team activities as an individual thing. And it doesn't work that way. And, you've got to, whoever you're sharing space with, it's having that conversation. There's no two ways about it. That's got to be the reality. And, letting go of past perceptions, which I know will be challenging, but I don't see any other choice that we have right now to get through this as smooth as possible.
No, you're right. Actually, when we're done our interview, I think I will go and practice exhaling because I've just been holding my breath as well, waiting for this to be over, but who knows when it will be. So really good tips. I want one more question before we finish. It's been in my mind since you talked about this. So you talked about on the sailboat, allowing the children, allowing the kids to sort of go down their own path of what they were interested in and learn that. Do you have any examples? Like what was an example of one of your children found an interest in something, and how did you go about encouraging that so there was learning that happened?
Of course. So the simple story is my son Columbus. I know it's almost as though I had a name for him, sort of all pre-planned, isn't it? So
I wasn't going to say it, but yeah.
So 3 months in, I remember sitting down with him, trying to teach him history. And I sat down at the table with him, the history books, and set him the work to do. Came back an hour later, and he was sitting there with his arms crossed, looking as bored as he like. And it's like, what's going on? And he's like, I'm just not interested. And so, all right. So I said, what are you interested in? He said, I'm interested in fish. Okay. So we got all the fish books out, and he started reading about all the different fish and the different oceans they swim in, and how fast they swim, how you catch them, how you cook them. We then started catching fish. And the boy who wouldn't write is now writing this journal of where we caught fish, what did we catch them on. We're starting to dissect them. We're starting to cook them. So he's now reading, he's writing, he's weighing them, he's measuring them, we're dissecting them, he's doing biology. When we get to the other side of the Atlantic, over in the Caribbean, he sets up a business making and selling fishing lures. So now he's sort of working out margins. He's going around to the other boats and he's selling these things for $5 a piece. He's writing out advice sheets. He's selling these for $1 a piece. And then basically he just gets fascinated with the fish and the natural world. And so because we're just encouraging that, that's kind of where he's gone to. So he has an absolute fascination now with the natural world and what's all around us. And he's always got his head now buried in the book and looking at outside and what's happening. And he's got a gardening plot now. So it's just that whole thing of finding that thing, that seed, and just following that. And that's what's taken him to lots of interesting places.
So it started with fish, but in the grand scheme, then he ended up learning not only about fish, but biology, science, maths, reading,
business,
writing, business, economics.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Wow. Great example. Thank you. I was thinking history, he could have said, well, I really like knights. And then he could have studied medieval history. So, but it could work that way, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's finding whatever it is that sparks the interest, right? And when we're interested in something, our learning rate just goes through the roof, doesn't it? Because we want to do it.
Yeah.
And that's what I was trying to encourage my kids, is that curiosity. What is it you're interested in? And let's follow that.
Well, that's great advice. Thank you so much for your time today, Caspar. I really appreciate it. I think this is one of the areas that people are probably really struggling with right now. And that was great. They were great tips and techniques and stories about how we can better manage this. So it's CasparCraven.com.
Yep.
And I will post that. And I think you've got a superpowers quiz, haven't you, on your website? Can you share that?
Yeah. So with all this thing that's been happening around COVID-19, I thought, what's some of the most helpful things that I can do? And there's a piece of training that I normally run in workshops and coaching with people. And I thought, I'm just going to make this available on my website because it was one of the most powerful things that I've done. And basically, the reason that Nicola and I were able to find the right roles for each other, what were the things we were both brilliant at doing, was we followed this superpowers exercise. I used it in my business as well. It was a core part to turn my business around. And very simply, it's a technique walking you through, getting feedback from a handful of people who know you really, really well, and they tell you what are the things that you're amazing at doing, because we always undervalue the things that we are brilliant at. Because we do them well, we think everybody else can do them well as well. So it's just a really simple, like 3 video step exercise of walking you through the process to go and do that. And by the way, I'm not trying to sell anyone anything, it's just literally just trying to add some useful things out there that other people can use. So it's on my website, Superpowers Quiz.
Wonderful. And the book is Where the Magic Happens, and it is the story of you sailing around the world with your family, correct?
That's exactly that.
Which I think would be an awesome read. So Caspar, thanks so much for taking the time today, and hopefully I'll see you back in the UK soon. But have a great weekend and enjoy your social isolation.
Thank you, Sue. Really, really great to chat to you. Take care.
Nice to see you. Bye.